I'll ask you guys the same question I asked the other class, and I'll tell you what, Dash Lloyd went crazy. He was the MVP of the period. Does anybody here know anything about the Boston Massacre? Yes.
I went to Boston once.
That's it?
Yeah. Well, they talked about it a little bit.
Well, what'd they say?
Well, they just talked about how the Samuel Adams and how he ran, or the guy who ran down the street and was yelling the British are coming.
Oh my God, you were rewriting history. That's way later. Why, Rick? What do they do with the Boston Massacre? But I'll ask you that later when we get to that point in history. Anybody else know anything about the Boston Massacre? Don't be bashful. Anybody know anything about it? I thought Fraser would pop right up with the answer. Don't go up. All right. Well, if you don't know anything about it, we'll tell you. But I'll tell you something. We're going to talk about a prelude to the Boston Massacre. You really don't know what the Boston Massacre is? When colonial colonists that were disloyal to the king started harassing British soldiers and they opened fire and killed a bunch of innocent people. You've never heard of the Boston Massacre? Seriously? Wow. Okay. Well, we'll give it to you today. But first of all, we're going to talk about a prelude. What's a prelude mean? Before. Something happened before. So a prelude to the Boston Massacre. What happened that kind of helped set up the Boston Massacre? That's what we're talking about. Okay. So are we all ready to roll? On February 22nd of 1770, February 22nd of 1770, a clash began in Boston, Massachusetts, between Loyalists and Patriots. I think they're on your ID sheet, aren't they? Loyalists and Patriots. Danny, what's a loyalist? To, in this case, the British, Great Britain, loyal to the king. Loyalists are those living in the American colonies that are loyal to the king. What are patriots, Tatum?
The colonists that are against Britain.
Very good. The colonists who view Britain as an enemy. And they're clashing in Boston. And what happens is an angry mob of patriots gather in front of this business and start raising hell. Start throwing rocks and cursing and getting after the owner of the business. Why would they do that, Daniel? Why would these patriots harass this business owner in Boston? Because he was a loyalist. Okay? And they were harassing him. And they were giving him a bad time and throwing rocks and getting after him and his family because they were loyalists. Just an angry mob. Well, all of a sudden, another loyalist by the name of Ebenezer Richardson came by, and he went to the defense of this business owner and his family and tried to keep the patriots from harassing them and throwing rocks and whatnot. A loyalist by the name of Ebenezer Richardson came by the business and tried to defend the merchant and his business because he was friends with this business owner who was being harassed by these patriots. Well, what do they do to Richardson, do you think, Adriana? What do these patriots do to Richardson when he goes to help his buddy?
They probably start bothering him too.
What's that?
They probably start bothering him.
They assaulted him. Yeah, they assaulted him to the point where he ran back to his own home for protection. Okay? So Ebenezer Richardson comes to defend his friend and his friend's business and his family, and he's assaulted by the patriots, and he goes back to his own home for protection. Well, Bailey, what do those patriots do then after he heads for his home? They follow him. Very good, dear. And they start harassing him at his home and his family. So after being assaulted by the patriots, Richardson went back to his home for protection, and the mob confronted him at his house. He got upset, grabbed his musket, aimed it into the angry crowd, and did what? Luke? Fired. Okay? When the mob comes to his house and starts to harass him and confront him in his house, he grabs his musket, which is a rifle. In the colonial times, aims into the crowd blindly and fires. Unfortunately, boys and girls, an 11-year-old boy by the name of Christopher Sider was hit by that musket ball right in the chest. An 11-year-old boy by the name of Christopher Sider was hit by that musket ball fired by Ebenezer Richardson right in the chest. What happened next, do you think? They called for a doctor to try to save Christopher Sider's life. And the doctor's name was Dr. Joseph Warren. Dr. Joseph Warren was called to try to save this 11-year-old Christopher Sider's life, who was shot in the chest by Ebenezer Richardson when he fired into the crowd. And Warren tried gallantly throughout the day and night to save that young boy's life, but unfortunately, approximately 9 p.m. that night, the boy dies. About 9 p.m. that night, the boy dies. So Joseph Warren, the doctor that was called to try and save the youngster's life, tried as hard as he could, but unfortunately by 9 p.m. that night, the young boy died of his gunshot wound to the chest. 4 days later, on February 26th of 1770, 4 days later, on February 26th of 1770, a funeral procession took place and more than 5,000 Bostonians attended the services for Christopher Sider. 4 days later, on February 26, 1770, a funeral procession took place and more than 5,000 Bostonians, those would be people from Boston, attended the services for Christopher Sider. Why in the world would 5,000 people, do you think Christopher Sider had 5,000 friends in Boston when he was shot? What made those people come to his funeral, Luke Lamb?
The fact that he was shot, right?
The emotion of the whole thing, that he was shot innocently by a loyalist, brought all these people banding together, obviously patriots probably, and probably some loyalists, that banded together to support Christopher Sider's family, who lost his life, in their mind, for no reason. Okay? What would be your next question, Izzy? What happens next? What would be your next question about the death of Christopher Sider? What did they do to Ebenezer Richardson? Well, he went on trial for the killing of Christopher Sider. And when the trial ended, the judge announced a verdict of not guilty. Not guilty, believing that he was trying to defend himself. It was an accident, or Christopher Sider was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Probably shouldn't have been around a mob of patriots raising Cain, I'm guessing. I didn't read the judge's mind or find any research that said what his thought process was. But he did announce a verdict of not guilty for Ebenezer Richardson. So all of his troubles are over, right, Caleb? What did patriots continue to do to Christopher Sider? Or, excuse me, to Ebenezer Richardson? Harass him and actually assaulted him. He was tortured at one time, captured and tortured by local patriots for his actions. So even though he was not guilty in the court of law, patriots took the law in their own hand, captured and tortured him. Okay, that's the prelude to the Boston Massacre. Now we're going to take you to one short subtopic before that, and that's the founding father that no one knows. The founding father that no one knows. So Caleb, what's a founding father? Give me an example of a founding father discussion. George Washington. How about another one, Maddie? Benjamin Franklin. Very good. Aisha, can you think of another founding father? Was our second president of the United States, first vice president. John Adams. Yes? Thomas Jefferson. Founding fathers are people that got credit for getting this nation on solid foundations after the Revolutionary War. Okay? And we'll talk about that when we get to that point. But another founding father that gets absolutely no credit, who is unbelievably loyal and was absolutely responsible for the American independence from Great Britain, was Dr. Joseph Warren. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the founding father no one knows. This man was instrumental in America getting its freedom from the British. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Joseph Warren as a man. First of all, he was born in Massachusetts and was educated and then graduated from Harvard University. That gives you an idea how long Harvard University's been going, right? So he was born in Massachusetts and was educated in Massachusetts and actually graduated from Harvard University. At the time of the Christopher Sider shooting, Dr. Warren was only 28 years old, was very, very popular with the people of Boston, and was the city's most successful doctor. So at the time of the Christopher Sider shooting, Dr. Joseph Warren was just 28 years old. He was very, very popular with the people of Boston and was the most successful doctor practicing in the city. He also was a major advocate of the rights of American colonists. He was also a major advocate of the rights of American colonists. Regan, what is an advocate? If I'm a major advocate of Regan Schmelzer, what am I? What? You don't? You'd want me to be one.
Supporter.
Supporter. So if Regan said to me, Mr. Durr, I'm applying for a job at Ace Hardware, could I use you as a reference? I said, you know, I'll be a bigger advocate than that for you, Regan. I'll actually call Mr. Kennedy on the phone and tell him how awesome you are. Okay, that would be an advocate. So if he's an advocate of the rights of American colonists, he's one that supports the American rights over British, right? Okay? He was a very strong critic of British rule in the colonies. Very strong critic. Did not believe that the British should be ruling them in any way, shape, or form. He thought the colonies ought to rule themselves. He's a very big critic of British rule in the colonies. And he traveled all over Boston and all over Massachusetts talking about the rights of the colonists. How they need to not be under the suppression of the British government. Okay, he was very outspoken. Some people considered radical. And he had the support of the most radical group of patriots in the colonies, which were what? What were those people called? We talked about it. The Sons of Liberty. He had full support of the Sons of Liberty. Wasn't a member, but had full support of the Sons of Liberty. The reason we probably don't know Dr. Joseph Warren as a founding father of America is he gave his life for the cause and will be killed in this struggle for independence against Great Britain. So probably the reason we haven't heard of him is because he will lose his own life in the colonial struggle for freedom against Great Britain. Now, one thing I am very proud of an AP course, I'll bet you there's not another group of juniors in the state of Wyoming that have any idea who Christopher Sider is, Ebenezer Richardson, Dr. Joseph Warren. These are the characters I like to bring out to you guys in this class that no one else knows about, that had really key parts in the freedom of America from Britain. So we'll learn a lot more. Okay, that will take us then to the Boston Massacre that you guys know so much about that I'm going to have to key in on. The Boston Massacre. Well, there is no doubt that Christopher Sider's death united the patriots of Boston against the British and the British military. There was no question that the death of Christopher Sider united patriot citizens together against both the British and the British military that was stationed in Boston. No doubt about it. And within just a few days of Sider's funeral, the British regiments in Boston were being harassed and threatened by these patriots. So within just days after the funeral of Christopher Sider, these patriots living in Boston continually started to harass and threaten these British soldiers that were stationed there. Remember, how many soldiers were there per person? Remember? It'd be like having how many?
1 to 5.
Yeah, 1 to 5. It'd be like having 80 SROs in this building. Okay, so they're all over. You can't miss them. Easy to harass. And these patriots would constantly pelt the British soldiers with snowballs filled with rocks and any other objects they could find to throw at them. They were continually harassing them in Boston after the death and burial of Christopher Sider. And they were calling them those names we talked about, redcoats and bloody backs and lobsters and probably worse. And just continually harassing these British soldiers. And this agitation between the patriots and the British soldiers is going to cause such great friction that it's going to result in one of the most infamous events in American history we know as the Boston Massacre. Okay, this continual agitation on the part of the patriots is going to create some tremendous friction between the patriots and the British soldiers, which is going to eventually lead to one of the most infamous events in American history known as the Boston Massacre. Here's how this thing starts. It starts kind of childish, actually. It starts on March 5th, 1770. March 5th, 1770. And what happens is the 29th British Regiment, which is a group of British soldiers, was guarding a customs house in Boston. The 29th British Regiment was guarding a customs house in Boston. Kate, what's a customs house? Do you know? It has to do with taxes, so take a guess. What's a customs house? What was in a customs house that would need to be guarded by the British 29th Regiment? What kind of tax money that had been collected, right? And tax collectors were housed there that went out and collected this controversial tax. Well, they're guarding this customs house in Boston. And what happens on March 5th, 1770 is a large crowd of patriots gather around those soldiers and start yelling insults and throwing snowballs at them. They started taunting these members of the 29th British Regiment, started throwing snowballs with rocks in them, and they were especially getting after one specific British soldier, a private by the name of Hugh White, which I forgot to put on your ID sheet. Hugh White. He was a British private who the colonists were kind of picking specifically on, calling him names, throwing rocks at him, throwing snowballs at him. And he got tired of it. So you know what he did? He took the butt of his gun as he was standing at parade rest and he hit one of the patriots across the face with the butt of his gun. So Private White gets tired of this harassment by the patriots and he eventually strikes one of the colonists with the butt of his gun. As he's doing this, a British captain by the name of Thomas Preston sees that White is being assaulted and he rushes to White's defense with a few more British soldiers. Okay? So as Hugh White is fighting back against these harassing patriots, British Captain Thomas Preston witnesses that and he goes to White's defense, taking some British soldiers with him. Well, one of those soldiers was another private by the name of Hugh Montgomery. So we have two Hughes here. Hugh Montgomery. And as they were going to White's defense, one of the patriots threw a piece of ice at Hugh Montgomery and knocked him to the ground. So as Thomas Preston is bringing reinforcements, so to speak, to help Hugh White, Hugh Montgomery, one of those reinforcements, is hit by a big piece of ice thrown by one of the Patriots, which knocks Hugh Montgomery to the ground. He angers, gets up, and does what? Is he? No, worse. Fires into the crowd. So Hugh Montgomery gets up after being knocked down by a piece of ice thrown by one of the Patriots, stands up and fires into the crowd. Well, one shot led to another, which led to another, and when the firing stopped on the part of the British soldiers, 3 colonists lay dead, 2 more mortally wounded. So one shot leads to another. After the shooting stops on the part of the British soldiers, 3 colonists lay dead, and 2 are mortally wounded. Bailey, what does it mean if you're mortally wounded, dear? Severely to the point that you are going to die. So if you are mortally wounded, you don't die immediately on the shot. You will die of your injuries or wounds. Okay? So in essence, 5 people are killed. One of the 3 dead Americans right off the bat was a young man by the name of Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks. He's on your sheet, I believe, isn't he? And there must be something significant about him, or I probably wouldn't bring him up, right? Why would I bring him up and not the other ones, right? Well, it just so happened, on the sad note, that Crispus Attucks